sponsored, and if you've heard emails and advertisements that have gone out by a host of other organizations, including Pardes. And today is the first of our webinars with Rabbi Amy Eilberg, and we're going to be on our webinar, which will last no hour. This will be recorded, so it is being recorded right now. Everyone is currently muted, and we stay on mute. If you have questions to ask, the chat button on your screen, you can open that up and type in questions, and either she will see it or our moderator, Evan Silbert, who's at the controls today, will see it, and he can let Amy know. So we welcome your questions at any time. There will be time at the end of the webinar for everyone for answers as well. So if we don't get to your questions during the course of the webinar, will be time at the end. There will also be some slides being presented and some text that will be put on, and Evan will control those and put all those on there for you. So without ado, I would like to introduce you by Amy Eilberg. Say a little bit about the work, and she'll talk about the work that she's currently doing, which is fascinating. She just got back from a trip to Israel, and I'm sure she'll talk about that. But Rabbi Amy was educated at the Jewish Theological Seminary of America, and has the distinction of being the first female rabbi ordained in the conservative movement. So I've known Amy for quite a few years. She's a teacher, a great person. She's doing very important work now, which you'll hear more about. So again, we ask you to stay on mute. Hopefully you'll see her when she starts talking. I will turn my camera off. And please sign up for the rest of our webinars that we're going to have between now and the beginning of June. We have a line up, and if you need further information about those, you can just email me at mussarinstitute.org. So without further ado, I will mute myself and turn off my camera. And Amy?
Wonderful. You can hear me? Great.
Perfectly.
Terrific. Thank you, Jeff, and thank you so much to the Mussar Institute for this opportunity. Morning, good afternoon, good evening. It's amazing that we may be sitting all over the world virtually in this space together. So I need to begin is to invite us into prayer for peace. During the course of this hour, but if nothing over the course of the hour, but prayer for peace, it would be time well spent. So let us begin there. Evan, if you could go to the second page of the PowerPoint, just for instance, I've posted the words of the prayer, Oseh Shalom. I will chant a version of Oseh Shalom. If you think my voice singing will be distracting for you, you can just mute or turn down for. I invite everyone to join in this prayer in whatever way you would like. Shalom b'maroma, yaseh shalom aleinu, kol Yisrael ve'imeru amen. Oseh shalom b'maroma, yaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imeru amen. I everyone to keep that prayer in your heart or in whatever way you can throughout this hour and beyond. To the first page again, the PowerPoint. Over my work, say a word about in a minute. All kinds of different associations to the word peace, the word shalom these days. Many of them very heartfelt and positive and prayerful and reverent, and some negative associations to the word peace these days, which is, I think, a symptom of how much pain we're in about political. But I want to be really clear that for the prayer, I don't know what came to mind for you and the prayer for peace, but go from this point onward, when I say peace or pursuing peace or seeking peace throughout the course of this hour, I'm not talking about politics. I'm talking about left, right, or center, or place in the world. I'm specifically and intentionally referencing the verse in the Psalms. The Psalmist says, Bakesh Shalom V'Radfehu, seek and pursue it. And I was not speaking to words of state only, or to pundits. Quite almost was addressing that command to all that in the midst of our own lives is an imperative for all of us, with interpersonally and in our citizenship and our participation now as citizens of the states and of the world. But that's about the seeking of peace, the pursuing of peace that I'll be talking about is complex, but all about making our prayer real, the relationships in which we're in our own lives. I'm really delighted to be the first or whatever it is, the first speaker in a whole series dedicated to the subject of peace and conflict, put on by the Mussar Institute. Follow me. I won't bother with the dates, but just a spectacular group of people, several close colleagues and close friends: Rabbi Jaffe, Rabbi Daniel Roth, Rabbi Shelley Lewis, Mark Margolius, Rabbi Shmuley Yanklowitz, all just really spectacular human beings and teachers. And the idea of the series, those of you who attend many of them will see how well we carried out, was that we'd be moving in concentric circles from the center out to the broadest circle. The idea is that my perspective today will, at least in some ways, touch of peace very close to us, very close to home. And a couple of sessions will go to think about peace in intra-communal context, in context of intra-communal discord, and we'll move more and more broadly, and ending up with thoughts about peace. So close to home. Just a brief word about my story. I've been very deeply engaged in issues related to peace and conflict now for 11 years. It might have been birthed in me somewhat before that, but I date this very active period of engagement in my work to a day just a little over 11 years ago when I found myself at a dialogue center, Wat al-Salam, Oasis of Peace, in Israel, between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, and happened to be at the center on the day of what was to be a 3-day intensive dialogue experience, in which 100 16-year-olds, half of them Israeli Jews and half of them Israeli Arabs or Palestinian citizens of Israel, depending how they define themselves, that these kids coming from different communities, very different school systems, who also rarely have contact with one another, where the process of entering into deep and challenging conversations with one another. And it was time for me to, when it was time for me to go, the person who had driven me there said, we go back to Jerusalem. I had a very, very powerful sense of being really on the floor, of not wanting to leave that place. And then in a way that I can only describe in a kind of physical way, had a sense that I was being summoned somehow from beyond, from God, if you will, to leave and find some way to help. And I was on back to my house in suburban St. Paul, Minnesota, and tried to figure out, well, if I was summoned to make myself a cause of peace, how to do this for my home in Minnesota, and really have been seeking answers to that question ever since. And that work has led me in a number of directions. First, of course, like all of us, a very, very deep interest in Israeli conflict, but also much closer to home. I've worked a good deal in interfaith dialogue in these intervening years, and also in dialogue within the Jewish community, which, as many of you probably know, has been not at all an easy thing, particularly regarding issues of Israel, but sometimes necessarily do dialogue that well about other Jews within our community either. And all this connected very deeply to me with know as a human being, and what I think we all know as human beings about conflict manifests in our own personal lives. I like to say we're experts in conflict. I mean, unless if there's a tzaddik out there in the group somewhere, maybe you don't have any experience with interpersonal conflict, but I certainly do, and I think most of us do. And it can be a source of great pain in our lives, and occasionally a source of learning, than occasionally, with God's help, a source of deep relationship and of learning. So conflict have ranged from the most intimate to the broadest area of concern. So I've, as you imagine, myself in the study of Jewish sacred texts about peace and conflict, the nature of peace, and ways to address human conflict in various ways, about which our community, our tradition has tremendous things to say. And I've done a good bit of study on the secular literature of peace conflict, and studied a lot about modes of conflict facilitation. Along the line of this, I was very, very deeply engaged with, very persuaded that there's a lot of great theory out there, conflict theory, and there's a lot to be learned from that, and a lot of great wisdom, expertise in the field of conflict facilitation. And I believe very much that conversations benefit tremendously, conflict-ridden conversations benefit tremendously from well-designed facilitation. But at a certain point in this journey, I realized that although I believe deeply in theory and in structure, in design, facilitation design, I think the difference between when we do well and deeply a matter of who we are, a matter of the soul work on which the pursuit of peace is cultivating, to the extent that any one of us has been cultivating middot, or qualities of soul, move us in the direction of wanting deeply to contribute to the force of peace, to the possibility of peace, well-being of the people with whom we're in contact, to the extent that we've really been deeply devoting ourselves to developing a soul that's dedicated to those principles and the practices that get us there. That's, I think, what really makes the difference between when I, for example, get it sort of peaceful presence to a conflict, or the times that I blow it, just it, and rather than strengthening the energy of peace, pouring on an incendiary situation. Just a very brief plug along this way. I did write a book called "Stop and Think About From Enemy to Friend: Jewish Wisdom and the Pursuit of Peace," which kind of recounts the story and teaches some of the texts and the thread that moves through the book and then becomes explicit in the last chapter of the book is about for the pursuit of peace. My current iteration of this work, and Evan, if you could give us not the next slide, but the slide after that, with the Pardes Institute in Jerusalem in their North America program. The Pardes Institute, which is a yeshiva, very holistic yeshiva for the study of Jewish text in Jerusalem, has within it a Center for Judaism and Conflict Resolution, and directed by my colleague, Dr. Daniel Roth. Tune in because he's one of the teachers in this series. So the Center for Judaism and Conflict Resolution does all kinds of fascinating work internal to Pardes and width and breadth of Israel, all kinds of interesting work, which I think Daniel will tell you about when it's his turn. But I now work for the center, bringing their work into national life in North America. It's a new program, and we've been working just for a few months to engage synagogues, to some degree other Jewish organizations in North America as well, but primarily focused on synagogues, to really raise the question, what would it mean for North American synagogues to take seriously as institutions, as per institutional mission, to seriously and deeply and boldly about the middot of pursuing peace? What would a synagogue were the place that inspires us and for us and support us as a community of people, all of whom are trying the best we can, sometimes failing, sometimes just making an opportunity, but that which we support one another to be the best pursuer of peace we can in our intimate relationships, in our families, in our workplaces, in our schools, in our communities, and beyond. If the synagogue really were the exemplary institution of pursuit of peace, and so the program, I won't Rodef Shalom Communities program, if you like, a whole variety of ways in which we're working with rabbis and working with communities to engage communities both in deep study, rigorous study of Jewish sacred text around peace and conflict, and also linked with solution practice and skill building, and also with the middot work, with the soul work. What does it take for on the deepest level in our souls step forward into shalom to people, to be people who pursue peace whenever we can of our lives. So I'd like to move on to the next place in the PowerPoint. The timing of this webinar today purpose particular meaning in the Jewish calendar. As some of you may have heard, there's a date in the Jewish calendar, the 9th of Adar, which I know I had never heard of until I met Daniel Roth. Maybe some of you had, but it turns out that they're in real text, not even in very, very funky, marginal, obscure Jewish texts, but in very prominent Jewish texts. There is a mention of the date of 9th of Adar, which is coming up. Of course, we have 2 months of Adar this year. The Adar shown the first Adar, the 9th of the first of Adar is coming up on February 18th. On the ninth of Adar, about 2,000 years ago, we'll look at the text in a moment, some between Shammai and their students in Rush. And we know we have all kinds of statements in rabbinic literature that celebrate the ways in which Hillel and Shammai and their students really knew how to do conflict in a very connective and even sacred way. They knew how to respect one another and to disagree, but continue to be in relationship with one another and with one another's families and not demonize one another. But on the ninth of Adar, something terrible happened. The sources disagree about what precisely happened, but something terrible happened. More on that in a moment. But the Pardes Center for Judaism and Conflict Resolution has now put out the word that the ninth of Adar can be used as a occasion for communities, synagogues, chavarot, Jewish, whatever, to really reflect deeply, to study, to practice, to explore what Judaism has to teach about the difference between destructive conflict and constructive conflict around conflict that destroys relationships, that tears relationships apart, and between the conflict that can actually deepen and strengthen and even sanctify relationships. Over to the 9 Adar source sheet, Evan, could. I'm going to go through these sources very, very quickly, but I assume there's a way for us to then make these sources available to everyone afterwards. So those of you who'd like to take a leisurely, deep look at the sources can do so. I'm just going to do very quick headlines. And this handout, for whatever reason, starts with the English of each set of texts, and then afterwards is the Hebrew of that set of texts. This handout is put together by Daniel Roth. In short, there's a vote coming up. We're on the eve of the Iowa primaries, and one of the morals of the story is that nasty things can happen. In case we didn't know this, really bad things can happen in discord in the midst of a campaign. Well, it seems like there was some kind of important vote coming up in which Hillel and Shammai and their students were about to take a vote in the Beit Midrash about 18 matters of law, and things got explosive. Different sources describe the explosions differently. As you see down on the left side of this page in the Babylonian Talmud, there's a reference missing there. Shabbat 17a. Brought a sword into the Beit Midrash. Suddenly, there's a weapon in the Beit Midrash. On the right of the page, about the middle of the page you're looking at in the Jerusalem Talmud, it says that day, the 9th of Adar, was as terrible a day for Israel as the day on which the golden calf was made. In course, and according to one account, the students of Beit Shammai to slaughter the students of Beit Hillel. If you would scroll down a little bit to the next page, Evan, different commentaries explicate this a little differently. Maybe the next page. Some sources say, well, yeah, there were swords, but nobody actually died. Sources actually say 6,000 students were killed. I'm sorry, 3,000 students were killed. Oh, you know what? Sometimes a story gets larger and larger. The source says 3,000 students were killed, which it really happened, of course, is quite extraordinary. Other sources say, no, actually no one died, but it was something terrible happened. Actually, it was the day that Machlokes exploded between Shammai and their students, and that itself was a negative and dangerous thing. So actually, both versions are really interesting. If it's possible that the rabbis and their students actually came to violence in the Beit Midrash, it really tells us something that even the most righteous and learned of people can completely lose it. If there was actually physical violence, the version I think is just as interesting, because I think the word on the street is that, yeah, discord is great. We like discord. We disagree with one another. That's what Jews do. This is how we talk. It's terrific. We like it. here from my tone of voice that I actually have difficulty with that narrative. The story says, you know what, conflict can be dangerous. Conflict, even bracketing, no risk of physical violence. Conflict can hurt people. So the Shulchan Aruch actually says that the Nadar was declared to be a fast day. Though another person says, well, actually, I never knew it. You actually fasted on 9th of Adar. It is a really important time for us to continue to remember with the sense of tragedy, actually, that conflict can be a serious problem. Moving to the next page, again in the English, just for the sake of being able to do it quickly. Some of the language that I've been using about constructive conflict or sacred conflict as opposed to constructive conflict comes from, as some of you have probably already discerned, from the famous Mishnah in Avot that you have now in the middle of the page. Every machloket or controversy that's for the sake of heaven, l'shem shamayim, will continue to exist, but one that's not for the sake of heaven will not continue to exist. And then the Mishnah says, well, what we mean by a controversy that's for the sake of heaven? Well, that kind of controversy that Hillel and Shammai had. And you can imagine the commentators have all kinds of different ways of jumping in and trying to analyze that language and trying to figure out, well, how do we really know what about the argument or the mode of discourse between Hillel and Shammai that made it l'shem shamayim, that made it sacred or constructive. I'm going through this quickly, but in the commentaries, there are a couple of very interesting suggestions which the discourse is not just a matter of cognitive exchange, but of our intention, of the orientation of our own souls. For example, on the next page, please, Evan, the interpretation mark number 2 there. You know, the difference between a conflict and a destructive conflict has to do with whether your inner intention, like, why am I having this argument? Why am I? In the different dimensions of this disagreement, we can place, because I know that as a being, I can't perspectives, only God can know that. So only in conversation with one another do we have the possibility of reaching a greater truth. And my purpose is not because I want to beat the other side down, because I want to win, because I want to get the points, because I want to get the ego gratification of one who came out on top of this argument. That's a machloket she'eina l'shem shamayim. That's a highlight of the wrong way to do disagreement. So these are not intellectual categories, right? These are categories of soul. Those texts, but I think that can be a lovely segue from the whole subject of what happens to us in the midst of conflict. What are our deeper intentions? And inevitable, and sometimes positive times that we are in disagreement with other people, in the rubric of the command to be seekers, pursuers of peace. And we practice, inevitably we bump into disagreement in our life. How can we make those moments times of spiritual practice in the middot, right? That Mussar category of hitlamdut, of being in the stance of the learner all the time. What comes from this? I mean, in the midst of an argument, sometimes we have our self-awareness, but how can we use those times of disagreement, those experiences of disagreement, to learn about the content of of the disagreement, about the other person and how they experience the world differently than we do, and to learn about our own selves and our own practice. How can we learn to be more grounded, more centered, more closer to the aspirations that we have for our own soul, more closer to God, even when things get really hard and really difficult. I ask you just for a moment. You probably, the conversation has probably led you in this direction anyway. Close or take some notes if it's helpful. Think of a conflict you've been involved in recently. A fix, for example. But and adversary in the conflict seems to you. If you're in an inner state, which in this moment when you are picturing this, is there even in which really in which what's being drawn out of you in this is really not the best of you, not your soul's capacities. It's a hara. Give you a reflection. So, I've gotten really interested in the intersection of Mussar and the subject of peace and conflict. And I want to be really clear that I don't think that, I'm not saying that the Mussar system is a solution system. The create this system and share their wisdom only to help us with issues of conflict and conflict transformation. But now, as students and practitioners of Mussar, that what we learn in our study and practice of Mussar is applicable to areas of our lives. It's been clear to me that the practice of tikkun middot, of purifying and clarifying and transforming our own middot, it has extraordinary resonance in with conflict transformation. So, Evan, if you would go back to the PowerPoint and give us the next page on the PowerPoint. All together, and I would ask you, which middot would you say are to the process of trying to be pursuers of peace? You come up with a and rightly so, with a very long list. But what I have here is a short list of middot that I have as particularly connected to the work of seeking to be a Rodef Shalom. Them here, chesed, for sure, kindness, which I think of, to put it very briefly, is really desiring the well-being of all people. Compassion, which I think of more, this is maybe an artificial distinction, but I think of chesed as sort of horizontal, of a desire for the well-being of all people, whereas rachamim is more that vertical, deep dive into empathy and feel in an empathic way the pain of the other, resonate with the pain of the other. build relationship based on that kind of deep connection. Slave or generosity, whereas in conflict we often get right. I need to win, cede an inch because then I feel like I'll lose everything or I really will be in danger, as opposed to generosity, really the desire to help someone else also feel in the conflict, which is hard and essential. In the best kind of conflict engagement, da'at, self-awareness, anava, humility, for sure, as we saw before in that text, the difference between engaging, how often do we see this, God help us, in political discourse, that it's all about winning. Right? I think we do this, I do this in individual relationships too, at a certain point in our life. It wouldn't even matter what the content is, but I just want to win, right? That's God, right? That's as opposed to when engage, my commitment to the middot of the amount of space and not more, not trying to push the person out so to prevent them from having any space. You see what I mean about the involvement of humility, curiosity, sure, menuchat nefesh, and equanimity. But I mean, not sometimes the Mussar text see equanimity as the opposite of worry. In my saying kavod should also be on the list. You are absolutely right. Kavod should be on that list. Thank you. Great. I'm going to write that down. Kavod should certainly be on that list. But anyway, back to, I invoke equanimity in this context as the opposite of reactivity. In conflict, it's like my nervous system is engaged. Yes, reactivity, anger, all of that. And I think the limbic, the primitive limbic part of my brain, reacting as if there's a bear running across about to kill. When there's something very threatening about being in an argument in which there is threat, psychic threat in some way, or I actually just am threatened. There's a person, family, or in my community, or in the world who holds that kind of view, that breeds a kind of reactivity. Opposed to equanimity, which is a sort of sense of the capacity to take a breath and to say, okay, this is manageable, this is tolerable, I'm in a relationship with this person, it's possible to continue the conversation. A lot of these are sort of soft middot, to make ourselves softer in order to make space for the other in some way. But conflict engagement also often demands courage, which is to say something in conflict that may be received, but the authenticity and the fruitfulness of it depends on my having the courage to say what's true first. So I see Gvora as a factor as well. So, Evan, if you would move us out to the middot. There's not nearly enough time to do this justice, but as I said, there's lots of good stuff here, and we'll share it with you later. How do a couple of, given I started Chesed and my have been studying the Alei Shur on Chesed, and I found this piece not long ago and of it on out, just to be confusing the Hebrew of each text, English. It's first Hebrew, then. So I'm, again, just to be able to do it very quickly, I'm going to go down to about the middle of the page. We have a passage from the Alei Shur Rav Wolbe about Chesed. Humanity in the divine image did not only give of God's glory to humanity, adorned with qualities of intellect and soul, but God created in the divine image in the sense that God gave us the power of the raised face. I don't know really how to translate this in Hebrew and would love other suggestions. Hebrew is Ha'at Panim with an aleph, or the face. Think about the Kohanim, the priestly blessing that recited in shul and is recited every night. The blessing the parents give their children. Ya'er Hashem panav elecha. May God bring the light of God's face to you. which is blessing. Revolting was the image of God. So God gave, not only does blessing light God's face, but we also carry a reflection, I guess, of divine light in our own faces. Face is hidden a treasure of blessing and mercy. More, just to stop there with that text. If I'm in the midst of a really if I could remember to take a moment to and for, I think probably my face looks really fierce and angry. I instead reach for this panim. You know, I'm in God. I can radiate light. With how different would my relationship be with this person? No matter, let's say this person really has hurt me or really done terrible things that may actually be true, even true. The light of the divine face to the other, how different makes the encounter they're having. It's one little gem. Another little gem on the next page, Evan, please, of that. You see halfway down the divut leg or generosity. Of kavod, I think, in different language. So I'll read the English is the very bottom of the page. Quoting Leviticus 19, your neighbor fairly. B'tzedek, or you might say judge your neighbor. B'tzedek tishpot amacha. Rashi connects that. I think the simple meaning, the pshat of that verse is about, in court. But Rashi says, your midrash, the Torah is not talking about litigants. We're not talking about a legal context in this verse. That seeing one's friend do something that could be judged or positively. So those three words, b'tzedek tishpot amitecha, talking about a situation in which someone does something and judge them positively or judge. Continue next page. Judge him or her favorably, or her of sin. To the Mishnah, judge every person favorably. All that time. When's the last time? Think of a recent example. I can think of examples yesterday. Somebody did something, and mine can easily lead to a negative interpretation. Oh, they only did that because of this, and they were out for that, and so on. My mind very easily leads to negative interpretations. Middot, according to Rashi, of b'tzedek tishpot amitecha, judge your neighbor fairly, is to say, wait a second, even if it's an inclination, then can stop and say, is to interpret what that said and did, even if it really caused harm, even for someone that I maybe that person is ill or is dealing with some terrible tragedy at home, and that's why he or she behaved the way he did. Or it would be an interesting Mussar practice just to spend thinking every time a negative judgment comes up. Can just try with a leap of imagination up positive explanations of what might have that person and what might have moved them. This is gorgeous. The next, every action of every person placed on the scales, right, the scale of justice, innocent or guilty. This is operate in the human person, the inclination good, the inclination to evil. For every act derive from either inclination. Everything a Tov side, or it might come from the Yetzer Hara side. Because we human beings see from the outside, and search out the mind and heart, klayot valev in Hebrew, we establish with certainty the nature of the act and from what source it flowed. From the outside, we know, God knows, but we cannot know really. We know the external impact, but we cannot know from what part inside that person's soul that action flowed. And every person favorably, side of innocence. That the statement might have come, or the action might have come out in a way that was harmful. It might come from a good place, and we cannot know that. So we are to judge. So you see what rich kindness might make, even a moment of it in the midst of an argument. You know, from a perspective of saying really terrible things, is to invoke that memory of, I actually don't know where that's coming from inside that person's soul. Can an act of generosity and that may be coming from a good place? A couple of them, but this next one, da'at, self-awareness. Remember this, I keep referencing from Psalm 34, Bakish Shalom V'Radfei, who seek peace and pursue it. So the sage Midrash and early rabbinic literature, the sages said, Shalom. Actually, they're asking. Psalmist uses two different verbs: Bakish Shalom V'Radfei, who seek peace and pursue it. The sacred literature doesn't just use extra words just for rhetorical flair. If they're two different verbs, they must different wisdom to us. So, what is the bakesh, the seek peace part? The source of seek peace means in your own place. Peace means sort of far away, but in your own place, close to you. You see it here: seek peace in your own place and pursue it in another place. By Rabbi Simcha Bunam, early Chassidai, on that early midrash is you cannot seek peace anywhere but within there. Take that to mean a call to self-awareness, right? If I see that I can help resolve a conflict between other people, but paying attention to what's moving me, a blend of positive and negative, conscious and unconscious motivations that are moving in me, to the pain that I may be speaking out of. I'm not doing my own inner work. I'm not. To me, like an incredibly contemporary sort of teaching, but it was late 18th, early 19th century Hasidic Rebbe self. And let me do one more, and then I want to stop and make some room for you. So many favorite. But let me take this one on page 5 of the handout. The box. The rest of these handouts are all Jewish texts. But this one is a contemporary 20th century Israeli poem by Yehuda Amichai. And this found it in Jerusalem right in the midst of this moment when I was kind of discovering this calling to peace work. This poem actually written in Hebrew on the inside stall of the bathroom. So it was a revelatory moment. Like this poem makes attention. I'll just bo anu sodkim lo yim ba'aviv. Flower never in the spring. But doubts and lusts dig like a mole, a plow, and a whisper will be heard I would say this expresses the midah of curiosity, or also really the midah of humility for me. From that place where I am absolutely sure that I am right and the other person is wrong. And if I'm honest with myself, I very often, when I'm in a sort of intense conflict, I often slip into that place of I'm right, and of course the other one is wrong. How could anyone else possibly think about it that way? In our rightness and the other's wrongness, as lo prachim ba'aviv, that's a hard place. That's a place where the soul is so hard that if you put seeds on it, if you poured seeds onto it, it wouldn't penetrate. Nothing penetrate. Nothing can grow. Nothing can from that. Nothing new can sprout from that hard place of one self pitted against another, one arrogant against another, one curiosity. Certainly, that if we learn anything from the person, the opposite being from places where I'm able to take a breath, or in those moments when I'm able to take a breath and say, what of their position as I am? From their own life. I wonder if there's some way that in continuing to push a moment and ask them out of generosity the way that you do, how to open conversations in a whole different way. So there are a lot of things I'd like to do just in the last minute or two, but why don't we open up for a bunch of your questions, comments, on the chat and function.
Hopefully people see the chat button at the top of the page. You can add Amy or just to the whole group. If you're finding that, you know, the preferred way to do it. But if you unmute yourself and ask the question and then mute yourself again as well.
Well, I could say just another couple of things, and if somebody pops up with a chat, I'll come back to that. I would love to study these texts at my own pace. Great. Yes, it's really much more. And Jeff, we can mail this.
I'll be sending out a link to the recording. Over 200 people sign up for this, so everybody will get the link. Plus, I will attach all the events that we're seeing today, so that will be included.
There's lots of stuff here that's worth really delving into in text study at your leisure. Good. So let me do just a couple.
I think somebody had one question that just popped up. You said that?
No, I saw a thank you message, which is lovely, but I didn't see a question.
Okay, it says, thank you for the thought-provoking seminar. It's difficult to see the Yetzer HaTov in someone shooting a gun at me or a knife in my heart.
I agree. Where did that come from? That's my book. That's my book cover. Whoever said thank you, I should have made explicit that there are absolutely limits to approach. It's absolutely clear from Jewish law that when we really under attack, but that the imperative is for us to protect ourselves. when we're under psychic attack, there still is an imperative to protect ourselves. I think material applies. We're not thinking about the possibility of being attacked or the past experience or what I read in the newspaper today or what that person said to me yesterday or last week, that there has been real violence, physical or otherwise. But I think the Mussar teaching would still say, of course, physically, face-to-face, I need to protect myself, but there are maybe more situations than it's comfortable. It's comfortable to think this way. It is possible to think. I don't think terrorists think, right? You hurt me badly. If someone were hurt my child, it's a very visceral, reaction to that. And even still, it's not actively in there protecting the child. I have to take a moment and say, it might be that there's more for me to understand about that person to reflect. So,
I'll just jump here. There was, I don't know if you addressed earlier, there was a comment about symptom, about contraction. There's also from Marga, who are in the Netherlands, our European friends. They're mediators, and they said one of the middot they use is shtika, a moment of silence that people need to become reflective.
Beautiful. The time, I want to conclude this way. The photo of the cover of my book, but if we could go back to the PowerPoint, the last 2 pages of the PowerPoint, very briefly. Next one after that, next page after that. Great. For those of you who are involved in Jewish communities, particularly in congregations, I would encourage you to look for the Price Rodef Shalom Communities program, and we actually have a toolkit which which gives you a bunch of sort of handy possible ways to program around 9th of Adar, even though time is short. I think we've made it easy for you. And then on the next page of the PowerPoint, that last page, again, to the extent that this material is interesting to you, I would encourage you maybe to be in touch. And there are ways that we're able to partner. The Price Rodef Shalom Communities program might be able to partner with your community, bring this kind of exploration of Jewish text and conflict resolution, skill building, and middot work to your congregation. So thank you so much, everyone. I'm sorry that I couldn't see all of you, but it's so cool to be studying together from all the world. And let me just close by saying, may somehow our prayers for peace and our prayers to be able to serve the cause of peace in whatever we can come to.
Thank you very much, Rabbi, and thank you, Evan. I just want to conclude with a note. In our newsletter, Yashar, which will come out tomorrow or Tuesday, Amy has an article in there with a link to the 9th of Adar site, so please check that out. A comment from Jeffrey Amram, he's talked about creating a Seder around the 9th of Adar. I don't know if that's been done or not, but Amy, if you want to, you can email me or about that, and I can pass on the information. I think it's a great, interesting idea. I don't know that it's been done, but wonderful. So thank you. I just want to mention our next webinar, free webinar, is with Rabbi David Jaffe, who Amy mentioned, Sunday, February 14th. So in just a couple weeks, same time, same station, we'll be here. Thanks. You had a lot of thanks, including from Lee Herman, your USY friend in Philadelphia. So So we have lots of friends on, and please look for the we'll be sending out. Look for us next time. And again, thank you to Amy, and thank you to Evan for handling the logistics this morning. And that's it. Evan will turn the recording off and end the session. And everybody a wonderful summer wherever you are and whatever you're doing.